Hello, my friends. Today we'll start with the fact that Russia continues to create a complete blackout in Ukrainian regions. Late last night, strikes were carried out on the Dnipropetrovsk region, and it's been recorded that both the Zaporizhzhia and the Dnipropetrovsk regions are in a full blackout. Officially, due to strikes on energy infrastructure, the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions have been almost completely left without power, the Ministry of Energy reported. Critical infrastructure is operating on backup power. After the complete blackout occurred, reports appeared that new Shahed drones were still flying toward Dnipro. Accordingly, they're trying to finish the job as much as possible. Overall, Russia continues to pursue its goal, and they clearly have no plans to agree to the terms of a peace deal proposed by the United States. However, President Zelensky stated that the war could end in the first half of 2026. Zelensky allowed for the possibility that the war with Russia could end in the first half of 2026. The president said that the negotiation process has reached a new level with the participation of European partners, the United States, and all members of the coalition of the willing. According to the president, there is an understanding that the war could end while the current Cypriot presidency of the European Union is still in office, which lasts until June 30 of this year. France. Do you believe that the war could end in the first half of 2026? Write your thoughts in the comments. Zelensky also said that changes to the legislation for holding elections could already take place in February.
I think that if we manage to get all of this done in January, then February could become a working month in terms of legislative changes. This also depends on our members of parliament, because they must demonstrate real work and results on drafting changes to election legislation, the electoral code, or relevant laws, as well as amendments to the law on referendums.
Now, let's move to the situation along the front line. And start with the border area. Here, the Russians are not showing significant activity, but attacks are continuing. They're trying to break through the border near the village of Bessalivka and toward Pavlivka, but they have no success so far, and all attacks are currently being repelled. At the same time, in the Sumy direction, they are attempting to break through near Yablonivka along the highway, but over the past day, the front line has remained unchanged. In the Vovchansk area, the Russians are assaulting Staritsa, Prilipka, and the outskirts of Vovchansk. At the same time, the Russians have made no new breakthroughs here so far, and the front line has been stabilized for now. However, it's important to note that around Kharkiv, protective anti-drone nets are being increasingly installed over roads. This clearly indicates that the situation is worsening and that preparation for the worst-case scenarios have already begun. In the Dvorichna direction, there is currently a lull, and the Russians are not carrying out any new assaults. In the Kupiansk direction, activity remains very high. The Russians are trying to regain positions in the areas of Petropavlivka and Peshane and are advancing toward Kuralivka. However, no changes have been recorded over the past 24 hours. As before, Russian drone activity remains very intense here. They are attempting to control all logistics to prevent the Ukrainian Armed Forces from launching counterattacks in Kupiansk. Despite all these difficulties, for now, the success is on the side of the Ukrainian forces. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Novosergiyevka and Chernyshina. However, they are unable to advance further, and the front line hasn't changed over the past day. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are assaulting Stavky and Drobyshevo and are advancing in the area of the villages of Serednya and Karpivka. However, in the Lyman area, they are still unable to consolidate their positions, and no changes have been recorded over the past 24 hours. In the Sloviansk direction, the Russians continue to assault Ozerne, are already advancing toward Riznikivka, are attacking Vasyukivka, and are moving forward the area of the village of Bandarne. However, over the past day, no changes have been recorded, and all attacks are being successfully repelled. In the Kostiantynivka direction, activity remains very high. The Russians are advancing in the area of Chasiv Yar, assaulting Pretechina, Plashiyivka, Klebanbyk, Stepanivka, and are pushing toward Mykolaipolia and the area around Ivanopillia. However, despite the high activity, the front line remains unchanged. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians continue to assault Sofiyivka, Kucherev Yar, Nove Shahove, Nikanorivka, and Suvorove. So far, losses of Nikanorivka and Nove Shahove haven't been confirmed. Although some Ukrainian soldiers reported otherwise, the fighting continues. The Dobropillia direction is currently the most difficult and highest priority area for the Russians, who aim to fully capture Rodensky, Mirnograd, and Pokrovsk. Infantry assaults here continue 24/7, with attackers constantly advancing toward the front line despite heavy losses. Periodically, the Russians also conduct mechanized assaults with armor and small vehicles, but these occur mainly under poor weather conditions. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Rodensky. Fighting continues in Mirnograd. They attacking Hryshine and advancing along the western flank. However, over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes, although the Russians are actively breaking Ukrainian positions in Hryshine and are aiming to take the village under their control soon. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are assaulting Filia and Ivanivka, but there have been no changes over the past 24 hours. All attacks are being successfully repelled. In the area of Pokrovsk, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, despite being able to hold the defense, the situation remains difficult. Therefore, a mandatory evacuation from the Sinelnikova district of Dnipropetrovsk region has been decided. As we can see, Dnipropetrovsk region is gradually being drawn into military actions and more settlements are evacuated. This is direct evidence of how the situation on the front is developing. Unfortunately, stopping the Russians remains impossible. In the Huliaipole direction, this situation is even more difficult. The Russians have thrown a large number of resources into the offensive. They advancing near the villages of Solodka, Dobropillia, Varvarivka, and Zelene, and are also assaulting Preluki. Of course, heavy shelling continues here, but so far over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes. The Ukrainian forces continue to hold the defense as much as possible. in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Russians are not conducting new assaults. However, heavy shelling continues, and the spokesperson for the defense forces made a statement regarding Russian offensive actions. The Russians are advancing toward Zaporizhzhia. The battles for the village of Stepnohirsk continue. If the Russians gain control over it, only a few dozen kilometers will remain to the regional center, and they will hold the dominant heights, said Southern Defense Forces spokesperson Voloshin. In the Kherson direction, the Russians are advancing near the Antonievsky Bridge, but have had no success, and the situation remains unchanged. Meanwhile, the Kremlin reacted to the seizure of the tanker by the US. On December 24th, 2025, the vessel Marinera received temporary permission to sail under the state flag of the Russian Federation, issued in accordance with Russian legislation and international law norms. Today, around 3 p.m. Moscow time, in international waters beyond the territorial seas of any state, US naval forces boarded the vessel, and contact with the ship was lost. According to the provisions of the 1882 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, freedom of navigation applies in international waters, and no state has the right to use force against ships properly registered under the jurisdiction of other states. So, as we can see, they immediately brought up the UN Convention. But curiously, they stay silent about this convention when attacking Ukraine. However, the US is not concerned with what the Kremlin says and continues to act.
I believe you're referring to the Bella 1 tanker that was seized this morning. The Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, in coordination with the Department of War, did announce that seizure this morning for violations of U.S. sanctions. I've spoken about the enforcement of our sanctions policy at the podium prior to the new year, and this administration is going to fully enforce the sanction policy of the United States. The vessel this morning was seized in the North Atlantic pursuant to a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court after being tracked. And this was a Venezuelan shadow fleet vessel that has transported sanctioned oil. And the United States of America, under this president, is not going to tolerate that. I would also just add the vessel had a judicial seizure order, and the crew, so that means the crew is now subject to prosecution for any applicable violation of federal law, and they will be brought to the United States for such prosecution if necessary.
And a Republican senator said he is satisfied with the actions of the US.
So proud of what the president did, and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and everybody, our military, Maria Corina Machado, and what they did in Venezuela is going to change Latin America. This is the start of changing Venezuela. Then we're going to fix Cuba. Nicaragua will get fixed. Next year, we'll get a new president in Colombia. We're going to start, the democracy is coming back to this hemisphere.
So the president. But Russia has only one remedy for all its problems. Gurulev called for striking with the Oreshnik. Gurulev called to strike Oreshnik on Europe and to sink ships in the Black Sea in response to the seizure of the Russian tanker. As we can see, the US is playing big, while Russia is stuck in Ukraine. Also, today Trump stated that if it weren't for the US, Russia would have supposedly already taken over Ukraine. Remember, for all those big NATO fans, they spent 2% of GDP and most weren't paying their bills until I appeared. The US was paying for them foolishly. With all due respect, I brought them to 5% of GDP and they pay immediately. Everyone said it was impossible, but it was possible because, above all, they're all my friends. Without my intervention, Russia would already have all of Ukraine. Remember, I personally ended the 8 wars, and Norway, a NATO member, foolishly decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that I saved millions of lives. Russia and China don't fear NATO without the United States, and I doubt NATO would have helped us if we really needed it. Everyone is lucky I rebuilt our military during my first term and continue to do so. We will always be next to NATO, even if they aren't next to us. The only country that China and Russia fear and respect is the US, rebuilt by Trump. We will return greatness to America. Friends, do you agree with Trump's statement? Be sure to write your thoughts in the comments. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.